You ever stop and wonder if the lunch you're eating today could be the secret to having a sharp mind when you're, say, 70 or 80? Well, that's exactly the powerful connection we're going to dive into. We're looking at this absolutely groundbreaking study from Harvard that followed people for decades just to see how the food choices you make in your prime can literally build a better brain for your future.
So it really all boils down to this one critical question, doesn't it? Can the food you put on your plate now act as a shield for your mind later in life? It's a question that couldn't be more personal, really, because the answer could change the way every single one of us thinks about aging.
Now, to get a real answer to a question that big, you need some serious evidence, and that's exactly what we've got here, a landmark study from Harvard. What makes this particular study so special isn't just who did it, but the incredible scale and the amount of time they dedicated to it. And that, well, that gives the findings some serious weight.
Yeah, forget those small-scale trials. Researchers followed nearly 160,000 people. I mean, just think about that number. When you have a sample size that massive, you're not just spotting a little trend, you're looking at a really powerful piece of evidence.
And they absolutely played the long game. This thing spanned over 3 decades. They tracked people from their early and mid-adulthood all the way into their later years. You know, that kind of long-term perspective is incredibly rare in science, and it's what lets us connect the dots between diet and, well, destiny.
So how in the world do you even measure brain health over decades? They did it in 2 really clever ways. First, they looked at what's called subjective decline, which is basically just asking people, hey, how sharp do you feel? Then they measured objective function with actual cognitive tests, to see how people actually performed. It's the difference between feeling and fact, and you really need both to see the whole picture.
Okay, now for the main event. The researchers didn't just track what people ate in general. They compared their diets against 6 popular healthy eating patterns. They basically put them head-to-head to see if one was truly better for the brain. Think of it like a dietary showdown.
And here are the contenders. You've got the DASH diet, which is for blood pressure, a couple of plant-focused diets, and others designed to fight stuff like inflammation or insulin issues. But notice the common ground here. They all steer you towards more fruits, more vegetables, and more whole grains. That's our first big clue.
So, after 3 decades and almost 160,000 people, what did the data say? Which one of these healthy diets actually won the showdown for our brains? Well, it turns out the result, it wasn't even close.
While a few of the diets definitely helped, one was the clear champion. Following the DASH diet was linked to a stunning 41% reduction in the risk of subjective cognitive decline. And remember, that's not a clinical test. That's people reporting they just felt sharper and had fewer memory worries. The difference was huge.
Let's just let that number sink in for a second. 41%. A 41% lower risk. This isn't some small, marginal difference we're talking about. It's a huge, statistically powerful finding that suggests this way of eating has a major protective effect on our brains over the long haul.
But this wasn't just about how people felt. The benefits showed up in the hard data from the objective tests, too. Sticking closely to the DASH diet was linked to a cognitive age that was, on average, over a year younger than those who didn't. It's like your brain was literally testing as if it had turned back the clock.
Okay, so we know the DASH diet works, but what about specific foods? The study dug into this as well, and the data revealed something totally fascinating that kind of challenges some common health beliefs. This is where scientific inquiry gets really, really interesting.
First up, the usual suspects. As you might expect, vegetables, especially those leafy greens, fish, tea, and even moderate wine intake were all linked to a lower risk of cognitive decline. No real surprises here, right? This lines up with a lot of the health advice we've been hearing for years.
And on the other side, the foods linked to a higher risk were also pretty predictable. Red and processed meats, sugary drinks, refined grains, all the stuff we know we should probably cut back on. But look at that last item on the list. That question mark is there for a reason, and it's a perfect example of why we have to follow the data, wherever it leads.
So here's the curveball. The study found that a higher intake of nuts and seeds was, and I'm quoting here, unexpectedly associated with a slightly higher risk of subjective decline. Now, this is a perfect moment for some critical thinking. It absolutely does not mean that nuts are bad. In fact, they're a key part of the winning DASH diet. What this likely shows is that no single food is a magic bullet, and what matters most is the overall pattern of your diet, not just one ingredient. It's a brilliant reminder that science is all about nuance, not simple headlines.
Okay, so let's bring this all together. We know what diet seems to work best, but this incredible long-term study also gave us a really powerful clue about when these choices matter the most for our future brain health.
You know, this might be the most powerful takeaway of all. The study actually pinpointed a critical window for action. The strongest link between diet and later life brain health was found when people adopted these healthy habits in midlife, specifically between the ages of 45 and 54. This suggests that your choices during that decade could have an outsized protective impact for the rest of your life. It's incredible.
So what this landmark study ultimately tells us is pretty simple, but it's also profound. A heart-healthy diet is a brain-healthy diet. Eating patterns like DASH, which are rich in whole foods and low in sugar and salt, are one of the most powerful tools we have to protect our minds as we get older.
Ultimately, this research puts the power directly in our hands. The evidence is clear that the food choices we make, especially in midlife, have a direct and measurable impact on our cognitive future. So the real question is, knowing all this, what's on your menu?